So now that we're back inside VRED, what I've gone and done is set up a camera using a 35mm lens to get a nice sort of front 3/4 shot, and I've actually added some rotation in the wheel so we get a nice view of the wheel. And one quick tip about when you're turning wheels, try not to have the tire pointing towards the camera, because tires are not very interesting, and you know, a lot of time and effort goes into designing nice rims. So yeah, just remember that tip just for me, and I think it always looks good that, you know, the wheel should face the camera rather than the actual tire itself, because yeah, as I said, tires are boring and nobody really wants to see a tire. So what we can do now is actually go into start placing our lights and for our studio shot. And what we'll do first of all is turn off our environment, so we have a completely black scene. And then what I just did was make a quick bit of geometry that you can see here. It's just like a studio sort of you know, beveled corner, so you have a nice sort of fall off in the background. And then what we can do is start creating our first light, and this will be our sort of main above light of the car. So we'll go back to realistic rendering, we'll go to our scene and then go to our light editor. And what I want to do is just create a new light, which will be a spotlight, and then we're going to place this in our scene so we can get a good view of the car. So first of all, what I want to do is just transform it so we have it somewhere above the car, and I'm just going to drop it off to the back here and then move it up, something like that. And then we're just going to rotate it a little bit, so I think -11, 32 and 11. And then, you know, we can just play around with the values of the car. So now you can see it's if we go, for example, really bright, you can see what the car is doing, and at the moment the car is floating. So what we want to do is just maybe move this up a bit, if we can grab this and just sort of bring it level with the car, something like that. And so what we can do is continue with our light. So we can play around with the cone angle also, so I want to bring that down a little bit, so maybe 19. Turn off the wireframe and bounding box, and then yeah, we'll leave this at 15. And what we can do is also, yeah, definitely bump up the intensity, so I think maybe 6,000 would be something good like this. And as you can see, it's giving a sort of nice shoulder light along the side of the car. And what I will do is just drop down the diffuse a little bit, so it's not so bright on the floor and also in the glossy. And in the material of the floor, I'm just going to get rid of for now all of the glossy color and just leave it something like that, because we'll add some textures later and have some nice reflections. So what we can do now is place our next light, which will be a rectangular light. So we're going to go to create rectangular light, and then we're just going to move that into an area sort of behind the car or to the side of the car where we can get a nice gradient, and we'll use a gradient texture. So we'll set this to 25, and we'll just move this out here or so and move it up, and then we can just scale it so we can see the light a bit better. And we'll go with something I think around maybe 5 meters or so. So we'll take off uniform scaling, and then we'll make it 5.5 meters long, and then we'll make it 1.5 meters wide, and then we'll just make it 270. So no, it doesn't really matter because it does. So we have something like this, and then as you can see now already, it's lighting up the side of the car, but it looks ugly. It's way too bright, and we don't want to have it like that. So we're going to add in some rotation, or we just can move it behind the car, something like this, and then like this, so we can have it here nice and high. And then yeah, we just need to sort of rotate it, and I think maybe yeah, something like -50 and -21, and there we have a nice sort of light to light up the car. So what we want to do is actually add our texture, so we can use texture, and then we can load our gradient ramp that we created earlier, and then just rotate it so we have 180. And you can see already sort of the nice gradient it gives, and it brings out the sort of the shape of the car down here below the door. So maybe we can just play around with the diffuse again and just sort of bring that down so it's not so pronounced, and you know, it's looking quite good. And then in the glossy we keep that because it lights up the side of the car. And what we don't want is to use this light to light up the floor, so what we can do is create a light link set, and then in the light link set we can just drag our rectangular light in here, and then we'll drag our car in the scene node. So now you can see that it'll just lights up the car, which is what we want. So what we can do next is create our rim light for the car, and again we'll just use a rectangular light. And what I'm going to do is create this and then sort of drag it up and behind the car, and then sort of place it maybe around here or so, and then just rotate it so it's something like this. And then we can boost up the scaling again, and we'll say 2700 by 3440, and then 1681. So that's pretty big, and I think, yeah, right now it's a bit too high, a bit too close to the car. So yeah, we can just move this a bit further up. And there we have something like this. So maybe we can just move it over a little bit so we have the reflection on the windows. And actually maybe that's a bit too close, so what I want to do is just maybe move this away a little bit further back, and so we have something like this, and perhaps just increase the scale. And what I'm going to use again is another gradient texture, and this time I'm going to use a radial gradient, so we just get a nice fall off. Like, as you can see, it makes such a big difference already. So we have this sort of nice rim light on top of the car, and then what we can do is just play around with the diffuse value a bit, and you can see what a difference playing around there makes. And I think maybe we can just boost it up, maybe 25 or 15. I think that will do. And actually we can just hide this light, so we can turn primary visibility off, and do the same with this one, so we don't have the lights there. And we also want to add this rectangular light to our lights, so we don't light the floor. And I will also rename this to something like rim light, so just like this. LGT stands for light, so light, and then we'll say this is side gradient, and then our spotlight is our main light, so main spot. And so what we can do is now we can make our second sort of hero light, or rim light I would say, to give the nice reflections on the front of the car and the side of the car, and above the windshield. So again, we can make our rectangular light, and this one we just pull up, and we can bring it sort of over here somewhere. And again, we can play around with the scaling, so we'd want something maybe like 300 or 3 meters, sorry, and then we'll take this to 2, and then we'll say 974, something like this, and can change the rotation, so we'd like something like this. And then yeah, so we can start to see that now that we're getting these reflections on the side of the car, which is looking nice. And I think, yeah, maybe we can just move that light up a little bit, so behind the car, and then yeah, we can move it up something like this. And yeah, I think maybe, yeah, something like that. So now you can see that you're getting this sort of nice reflection on the front of the car, and you can see the shape of the car and things like that. So what we'll do now is again add our gradient light in, or our gradient map, and use our texture, and then again just pick this, and you can see it just gives you sort of a nice fall off on the edge of the light. So we can maybe just increase our, bring maybe the diffuse down a little bit, so as this the flakes in the paints really pop. And maybe you can see just at the top of the light, if that happens, it's just the light, the texture repeating, so you can change this to decal or decal, and it'll go. Next we can move it onto making our front light, just to light up the front of the car. And again, I will actually get rid of this and hide the light so we don't see it, and we can give this sort of our light rim light hood, because it's lighting up the hood, and that's, you know, an easy name, so we can do that. And again, I'm going to create another rectangular light, and then I'm going to move it up as before, and this time I'm going to move it sort of towards the car and maybe sideways a little bit, and then just rotate it so we can get some light on the front of the car, and maybe something like this. And of course we want to increase the scale, so again we're going to make it really, really big, so we want like 6,350, and then we'll go for 845, and then we'll go for 1680, something like that. But actually I'm not sure really that makes a difference, so we could actually leave this at 0, but it disappears, so we can't leave it at 0, so we'll just leave it, I think maybe even at 1, it's fine. And again we'll add our gradient map, so this time we'll add radial gradient again, and we'll just bump up the intensity to something like 150, and make sure that we put the light in the light link set. So we just want to move the light around a bit to find a nice angle, so we can go with minus 360, and then we can go with minus 4690, and then we can go with 1300, and then you can start to see the car is getting lit from the front. And then maybe we can sort of rotate it a little bit to just get us something a little bit nicer, and something like this, so it's not too strong, but you know, you can, it's giving off some light. And maybe we can just drop down the diffuse again a little bit, so it's not too bright on the front grille here. Or maybe we can drop down the intensity, something like 100. That looks good. So we're getting there slowly. We have just a couple more lights to add, so we'll do that next, and we'll just add another light to light up this left side of the grille. And so what we'll do is, again, we can hide this light from our visibility, and this time I'm going to just duplicate this light rather than create a new one. And this is actually light rim front, so we can do this, and then we'll just Control D to duplicate it, and then yeah, we'll just call this front right. So, and again, what we want to do is move this into a place that we can see it, and actually we'll of course turn this light back on, and then just bring it across here, and it's obviously in the way of the car, so we want to just maybe drop down the scaling a bit. And then we can just bring it over to the side a bit more, where you can see something like this. And of course we need to just rotate it, and we'll just go quickly back into our camera view, and we can see it here. And then we'll just dial in the numbers, so we want this to be somewhere around 3280, and here we can go with 1500, and then finally 1380 is fine. So now we can see it there, but at the moment you don't see anything, so we can just ignore this cone angle stuff and leave it at 45, and then we can just rotate it so it's actually shining on the car at 360. Here we go with minus 60, and here 345, and then we'll just boost up the scaling, so about 600. I think we can not see anything at the moment, so maybe you have to rotate. But alas, it's not working, so maybe if you turn off local lighting, yeah, there we go. So there's something weird about this. I think there we go. Make sure it's in our local lighting, and then we can just turn the intensity down back to something like 50, and then maybe drop the diffuse maybe to around about here, and also make sure to turn off the primary visibility. And then you can see the front of our car is getting nicely evenly lit. Maybe it's a bit too strong on this grille here, but that, you know, you could always bring that down in post. Or you could just maybe sort of bring down the glossiness as well. So it's something like that, and that's looking a bit better. Maybe we can bring the diffuse up a little bit. Yeah, that looks good. And the next light that we'll create is for the rim here. So we get a nice light. You can see on the rear we already have a nice light, but this one is pretty much in the dark, so we can add that next. And what we can do is actually just duplicate our front light, our rectangular light that we made, and then again we have to add this to our light linking set. But actually this time I'm going to create a new light link set, and it's just going to be for the wheel. So we create a light link set, and then I made a group already for our wheel, and I can just drag that in here. That'll go straight into C nodes, and then we can drag our light into there. So again, I will just turn on the visibility for the light so we can see where it is. And then what we want to do is sort of place this light sort of perpendicular to where the camera is. So what I'll do is actually reset this rotation, and then just make it a little bit easier to rotate. So we want this about 90 degrees this way, and then 90 degrees that way. But I think in this case it'll be minus 90. So yeah, there you can see it's lighting up the wheel. And then we'll bring down the scale to around maybe 200. And actually maybe, I think actually 400 or 350 would do a good job. 350 or 300. A bit of trial and error, but there you can see it's starting to reflect in the wheel, and the closer you move it, you get this nice reflection in the wheel. So we can go back, and then we can just like play around with the values of the light, because at the moment it's a bit too bright. So we can drop our intensity down maybe a little bit, and just to try and get it even with the rear wheel, so it's not too bright and it's, you know, it's not too dark. And you know, you could actually play around with the scale just to make a sort of thinner reflection if you want, or you can rotate it. You know, just get, it depends, you know, what kind of rim you have and how the light sort of reflects from the rim. So, but I think that looks okay. We can leave it like that, and then now we can sort of add our last light, which is going to be a spotlight for the background, and then we can also add some texture into the floor. So again, we'll just hide the primary visibility. What we can do now is just go to our lights and then create a new spotlight, and then what I'm going to do is sort of drag it somewhere behind the car like this, and then, you know, rotate it towards to where the geometry of the studio is, and then maybe just, you know, really up the intensity, so like 500, but there we go, something like that. And then we can go back to our camera and then just sort of play around with the position, maybe rotate it this way a little bit. And then we sort of get that nice gradient fall off in the background. And then we can, you know, maybe increase this to maybe 800. And perhaps play around with the cone angle so you can make it bigger and smaller. Yeah, personally I would, maybe something like this is fine. I'll just drop it down a bit, but yeah, it's personal taste, and you know, just to show and tell, it's fine. And yeah, so what we have now looks pretty good. And what I am going to do is maybe just bring down the cone angle a little bit of the main spotlight, just to, you know, bring it in a little bit, something like this. and I'm going to play around with the camera a little bit and maybe sort of change the color balance and drop it down to maybe 5500, give it a nice little blue tint, and then now I can add in some glow and some glare to get those pings. And then of course it's just a question of sort of dialing these in and finding something that looks good. So what we'll do is we'll let that render for a little while, and then we can come back and have a look at the final render when it's done. So now I've let that render for a few minutes. As you can see, it looks a bit different from when we started, because I actually went back and just added in sort of a bit of a ground texture and moved the spotlight a little bit, so it was a little bit more focus on the car. And then I played around with the fog values inside the camera and also the bloom and glare. So I can just briefly show you. I just enabled the distance and changed the noise size, the noise intensity, and sort of the color as well, and then in the bloom and glare just dialed it in until it wasn't too bright or too big, and then just let it render, and I think it looks pretty good. I hope you got a nice idea of what kind of lights we use and how we can put them together to get a really nice image, and we'll see you in the next one.